Hey guys, Corvus here, and welcome to another video. And I have a very special guest with me today. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. My name is Maclaine Diemer, and I'm a composer at ArenaNet, working on Guild Wars 2.
Yeah, so I've got a few questions for you today. So I'll just get started. So first of all,
Sure.
I was wondering kind of how far in advance you got plot points, like regarding season 2, or whether you kind of have a bank of music that you then like apply suitably throughout the season.
Yeah, it's like 50-50 maybe, or 60-40. It's difficult because we're all working on everything at the same time.
Yeah.
And different things take different amounts of time, and music tends to take a little bit longer to really polish it and get it sounding as full as it needs to sound.
Yeah.
And then that's just the writing side. On top of it, to get it ready to record with a live orchestra, is you got to back everything up like months,
Yeah.
so that by the time the deadline hits and everybody's got to be done, the music part is done. So yeah, I would say I try to get as early a jump on what the story is going to be as I can, knowing that aspects of it might change, unfortunately. And if necessary, I'll either reuse it, try to find some new place for it in the story that works, or just save it. There's a lot of music that I've recorded and saved, which is always a bummer because you get it done and you're like, yes, this is so good. I really want to share it, but you can't. There's at least 2 or 3 pieces that are in the can that no one's heard because the right moment hasn't appeared, but it will soon.
Yeah, yeah.
It will soon. But yeah, that's just the reality of it. Fortunately, there's usually at least concept art and some kind of design documents that you can peruse. Even if you can't play the content in game, you can kind of get a feel for at least what the core of the story and the vibe that they're going for is. So usually, if they change something at the last minute, it's not a big deal. And for example, there was a moment at the end of, at the start of the second half of season 2, so episode 5, where there was supposed to be a story instance in that was supposed to take place in Fort Trinity in Ore, which is, if you played the whole personal story, it ends in Ore in the base, and the pact is all there, and there's fireworks, and you hear "Fear Not This Night," but or the music there, it's the same music that's everywhere else in Ore, which is a little kind of spooky and dark, sort of choir pads and stuff like that. And I didn't think it was appropriate for Fort Trinity in that that's where the end of the story happens, and you just killed this big dragon, and all your buddies are there, and the end.
Yeah.
So I wrote a piece of music that I thought had the vibe of Ore, the very lush, sort of spacey choir pad sort of vibe, but felt a little bit more resolved, that I was going to put in that instance. And then for time reasons, or I'm not even sure why, it got cut, and then that piece of the story got moved into Fort, I keep forgetting what the name of this fort is, but it's in the dry top map, right? There's like a little, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Man,
it's like the core of where the story happens in Dry Top.
Yeah. I can't believe I can't remember that.
Yeah.
Is it Camp Resolve or something? Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah, Camp Resolve.
Yeah,
Camp
that's
Resolve.
it.
Yeah. So anyway, I ended up throwing the piece in there, and it works. And it's a good counterbalance to there's this sort of really martial, sort of packed gathering piece that occasionally plays in there too, depending on what's going on. And it works. I mean, I think it would have worked better in Fort Trinity, but sometimes that's what you got to do. Like I said, the piece was already done and in the can, and it was a shame to not use it, so I did.
Yeah, totally. So have there been any pieces throughout season 2 that you wanted to put in but weren't able to due to time restrictions, or Did you manage to do everything you wanted there?
No, there's one piece that didn't make it in because the feature got cut like super last second, and I didn't even find out until very recently.
Oh no.
Like at well after it was too late, I was like, I don't remember hearing that music where I thought I would, and I'm saving it. It was again. The funny thing is that piece of music, without unfortunately, I can't give away too much about
Yeah.
the content that it was originally written for, but it was written for something totally different, like a year ago. That got cut. I'm like, well, that's a shame. And then I finished it, and I thought, okay, now we can use it here.
Hmm.
And then that got cut. So sitting on it again, and it'll finally be coming out in Heart of Thorns.
Cool.
And it's a really cool piece. It's a shame it keeps getting cut, but yeah, eventually people will hear it.
Oh, looking forward to it. That sounds good. And you mentioned the live orchestra earlier on as well, because obviously most of the music for season 2 was done by an orchestra in Germany, I think, right?
Yeah. So there was two different. There's two different. Well, three. So
Right.
the first one we did was in Germany, um, and that was in spring of last year. That was the first time we kind of went through the whole process, and we recorded a decent amount of music, maybe like 20 minutes to half an hour in that session, and that was mostly the first 4 episodes of season 2,
Yeah.
except one piece, the Nightmare Court, that ended up being um, in episode 7, I think. And then we had the summer, and then we did another session in Budapest, in
Oh,
Hungary,
wow. Oh, that's amazing.
and that was most of what episodes 5 through 8 were comprised of.
Right.
And then let's see, we did another session in Germany, and what was that for? Oh, that was the Winter's Day Halloween, the live versions of the old Winter's Day and Halloween
Oh,
stuff.
cool.
And so a couple other things I can't remember. And then we just did a session at the end of the year in Seattle, and that was what we did the music for the trailers, the episode 8 story trailer that reveals the Heart of Thorns logo, and the announcement trailer. Yeah, the big announcement trailer they played at
Yeah.
PAX South. And that was a slightly smaller session. We didn't have the budget to do a full orchestra, so we did a string section that was kind of small, a little smaller, and overdubbed it a couple times,
Right.
and then a full horn section, because like a full sorry, not horn, brass, a full brass section, because a full brass section is only like 6 or 7 people,
Yeah.
but a full string section is like 40 people, which we couldn't afford. And then the woodwinds and percussion stuff is all samples.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, so like are we gonna I'm guessing you'll probably roll out an orchestra for the Heart of Thorns music, or have done that, or are working towards it just now. Because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. So the sessions we did last year were all. It was like every few months we did a small session,
Mhm.
because the nature of the Living World releases. It's just these bits of content that get, every few months like a new little chunk comes out.
Yeah.
So it made sense to kind of stagger things like that. But with the Heart of Thorns, since we're taking a break and we're working on it for so long, um, it gives me a chance to write a big chunk of music, and then we'll probably do 2 or 3 sessions, like 2 or 3 days, maybe max, and then we'll just do it all at once. And that's I don't even know when that I haven't even gotten that far. I gotta write some more. I gotta write some more music for this.
So all of the music from season 2 is, and I think the first season of the Living World stuff, the music for all that stuff is on SoundCloud. And I was wondering if there's any kind of plans for a physical release at some point. I know a lot of the community wants it. Whether you can, I don't know, say anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's going to get released, and it's going to happen in this relatively near future. It's something I'm working on now. Whether it's physical or not, I don't know. I can't say that it will be. It'd be nice if it was, but it's easier to release things digitally these days.
Yeah,
I'll say
totally.
that. And it's also faster,
Yeah.
So I'd like, before the memory of season two fades, I'd like to kind of get it out there. But I hope to have something to announce, before we change seasons. Let's put it that way.
Cool.
Like not seasons in the game, like real world season.
Looking forward to that. That'd be amazing. How many of you are there at the kind of audio team at ArenaNet that, and how many of you compose stuff as well?
It's a mix. So there's the core audio team of sound designers. If you include me in it, I originally started as a sound designer on the game, and I worked as a sound designer for the first two years that I was at ArenaNet. And so of that group, there's 5 of us, and we each kind of have slightly different roles that we play. That we can all make like cool explosions and magic spell sounds and that kind of stuff, but each one of us sort of fills a different niche in the game. Now so I haven't really done any sound design for the last probably year and a half since I took over the music. So there's really just 4 core sound designers that make content or do technical stuff, and then there's 2 additional implementers that we'll kind of pass off content to, and they'll hook it up to different props in the game or characters or spells, and they'll deal with the heavy kind of technical side, and they also streamline stuff. Right. One of my jobs was to do props and anything in the game that's not a character basically, or a boss or a creature that needs sound. That was my job for the first couple of years, and I did an okay job at it, I thought, but the guy we've got doing it now is way better and is really good at optimizing things, and so he mostly focuses on kind of cleaning up my mess. Right. And then we've got a audio QA person who kind of comes in at the end and just makes sure all of our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted before we release anything. And we've got an audio producer. So that's kind of the core audio team. And then for composers, it's a little different. So there's me. I'm this primary composer. Right. And then we also have Leif Chappelle, who is primarily a designer, like a content designer. And he focuses mostly on boss fights, it seems, and heavy kind of story stuff. That's what he's really good at. He like the Scarlet fight at the end of season 1 was his baby. And also the Shadow of the Dragon battles that were at the end of each half of season 2. So he's good at designing these really complex, intricate boss battles. If you like him, then thank him. Hate him, then curse him. But he also happens to be a really talented composer, and his background is actually in composition, which is funny, the paths that people's lives take. Yeah, it's crazy. So he's helped me out quite a bit, and it's great because he and I have totally different composition sensibilities, and I could never write the kind of stuff that he does, or at least as well, right? I could do sort of my pale imitation if I wanted to, which I don't, but he has a totally different style, which I love. So he kind of does, I don't even know percentage-wise, but he helps me out with, more and more over time. He's helped me out quite a bit. And then there's a third party that we've worked with a bunch named Stan Lepard, and he doesn't work at ArenaNet. He's a freelance composer, orchestrator, and he's helped me. He's actually worked on every recording session that we've done, primarily as the orchestrator, and kind of preparing the scores and all that kind of stuff. And then he's also helped with composition. In fact, the first music that we did after the release of the game that was new was his. So we kind of contracted him for some music for the first Halloween release in 2012, and the South Sun Cove release, which I think a lot of people forget about. But he wrote some stuff for that, and for Winter's Day, actually, the first Winter's Day release.
Cool.
And then every now and then I just need another piece, and I don't have time to write one, so I ask him to do it. But his hands have been on every piece of music we've recorded, and he's a pretty integral part of the whole pipeline.
Yeah, yeah.
Saves me a lot of time.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, so I was also wondering what like your favorite piece of season two's music. Well, yeah, what your favorite piece from the music of season two was, and if any like really stood out to you as like the best that you've ever done, or it might not have even been composed by you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. That's a tough question because on a personal level, I feel like each new piece has. I feel like it's gotten better over time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard to kind of evaluate it because you always have this opinion like the most recent thing is like the best thing you've done because it's like it's
Yeah.
the sum of all your knowledge up until that point,
Oh,
right?
definitely, yeah.
But my favorite, my kind of personal favorite pieces are I really like the let's just say of my own pieces, the stuff I really like are the pieces that go in the dry top map. There's four. Internally, we call that map arid, so I kind of just refer to them as the arid pieces. And there's four of them, and to me, they all kind of thematically connect. What I was trying to do with that map was have that sense of sparseness and openness that they have, and you know, these kind of windswept desert things. So there's a lot of focus on woodwinds, and a lot of crescendos and decrescendos to kind of mimic the wind, if you will. And they're very simple, and it's more about the texture than it is about just like blasting you in the face with a melody.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of
so-
like soundscaping kind of style stuff, like
Yeah,
really-
yeah, and you know that's actually something I struggle with because I always think about the melody first, and you know there's a balance between distracting people with like, hey, like here's this super catchy melody that's just like boom in your face, and also just having it be ambient. The point of it is that it's supposed to set the tone and not really distract you, and
yeah,
so sometimes I can't like tone it down, but I think those did a really good job of just setting a mood and getting out of the way.
yeah, definitely. They really, I think they perfectly set the scene for those zones. I remember like the first time entering the zone and hearing the music, it was like, I don't know, they just fit really, really well together. You totally get that kind of dry, like kind of wastelandy kind of feel from it. It's
cool.
brilliant, definitely.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. But my favorite piece I think of season two is actually not one of my own. It's one of Leif's,
Right.
and it's the Golden Cave. It's the piece that plays at the end of episode 8 when you go into the Golden Cave. I just think it feels very cinematic, and part of it is because you have that kind of sweeping, you know, vista of the cave. And the cave looks so beautiful, and it's like nothing. It looks like nothing else in the game, and the piece I just think sounds like nothing else in the game. It's got these really great interlocking arpeggios that played by the clarinet and an oboe, and then this beautiful, really simple string lines that play over top of it. I just think it's killer. So I told him we're kind of hashing out stuff for Heart of Thorns right now, and there's going to be more of that, right? Like if you've seen any of the trailers, there's glimpses of this place that is architecturally the same. So there's going to be more stuff like that, hopefully.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess moving on to a few more like kind of personal questions. I was wondering like how you got started in terms of working on video games, and just kind of getting your foot in the industry like that.
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief.
Yeah.
'Cause it's really like a winding path. But when I went to school for music. You know, our college, university, whatever you want to call it. I went for music, and when I got out, I really thought that I should try to be a rock star while I was young. And you know, I did a lot of touring with a couple different bands, and played a lot of shows, and played mostly really great shows, a couple stinkers here and there. But you know, some of that stuff is really just it's really just luck, and we had measurable degrees of success, but it's really difficult to sustain, and it wasn't something that was paying the bills, you know.
Yeah.
And as I got a little older, I thought, well, I could keep doing this on the hope that just over the hill is like the payday, right?
Yeah.
But I also thought that that was the wrong reason to keep pursuing it. Like, I love being in bands. It depends on the band, but I like it's a good band, you know, with your friends. I like
Yeah.
being in it. There's nothing like being in a room with your friends playing music. But I didn't. I was getting like jaded, right? I was getting kind of bitter about music. Like, how I know all these people who are so talented and none of them have achieved success, right? And
Yeah.
it's unfair. And then you start resent. You look at the TV and you're like, that guy's not as talented as my buddy over here, or like, oh, we write a song like that. How come this one's? So I just thought that was the wrong attitude, right?
Yeah.
'Cause music, first and foremost, should be fun.
Yeah,
I think.
totally.
I mean, unless you take it way too seriously, but it's a luxury to be able to do it at all, and to think that you can kind of pay the bills by doing it is like a super luxury. So you have to keep kind of a mental balance about your priorities, I think, or else it just spoils this beautiful art, right? Which is a tragedy.
Yeah.
So I kind of went back to a plan that I had earlier. When I was getting out of school, it was right around the start of the kind of collapse of the music industry. You would read a lot of bad news about declining album sales and the rise of Napster, right? This is the sort of heavy Napster area or era. And I thought, well, maybe it's good to have a plan B. And at the same time, you would start reading all this news about how games were starting to outsell DVDs and albums and movie tickets, like, combined every year by a significant margin. And I thought, well, okay, that's good news. And that was this was really the sort of the very start of, I think, a generation growing up and starting to look back on games. This was like just before the word chiptune was even coined, right? But I started seeking out old game music and being like, wow, this stuff is so brilliant. And appreciating the strengths of that music, and then how music had evolved from this really simple bleeps and bloops kind of stuff to, you know, right around then, it was like 2003, right? It's like the very beginning of big orchestral scores being recorded and put on a CD rather than cheap kind of MIDI sounding music. And I thought, all right, well, that seems cool. I could do that. And it was always kind of in the back of my mind as I was in bands and stuff like that. So every once in a while, when the band thing would kind of slow down, I would look around, and this was, I used to live in Boston for a long time, and there's a handful of game companies in Boston, and I would send out applications, but it's really competitive. The game industry is really competitive to begin with, and then the audio field is even more competitive because it's usually a very small team. If it's even a team at all, a lot of times it's a third-party company that gets contracted for 6 months to come in at the end and work on a game. So I found it really difficult to break in, and that's just audio, right? Like, music is a whole other thing. Usually it's just one guy that they hire to write the music for something. And I was having a lot of trouble. So eventually I ended up in a band with a guy who was a programmer at a studio called Harmonix, which is based out of Boston, and they make Guitar Hero, made Rock Band, Dance Central, right? So all kind of music and rhythm, like beat matching related games. And at the time, this was Rock Band had just come out, and they were expanding pretty heavily. So I was in his band for a couple years, and I decided it was time for me to move on, and he very generously offered to pass along my resume to the HR department there. And he got my foot in the door on the audio team there. I was very fortunate that he didn't hate me after I quit his band. But yeah, he helped me out, and I worked at Harmonix for a couple of years in the audio department, mostly doing transcribing stuff for Rock Band, and a couple, you know, it's kind of strange because it's not, the work there in the audio department specifically is not very it's not very heavy, right? Like
Yeah.
it's based on the nature of the games. There's not a ton of sound design work that you're doing. The music is all somebody else's music for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, right? So, but it was a good place to learn and to get your chops up just cranking out games, right? It
Yeah.
was like we had to make one every year, and then when they started doing Rock Band and Dance Central, it was like this accelerated schedule, and every week we had to release new DLC tracks for for Rock Band. So it was good. It was a very intense kind of boot camp for
Yeah.
making games. And the people there were fantastic. I loved working there. After a couple of years, I got tired of it though, and I got tired of living in Boston. At that point, I've been living in Boston for a long time, and I'm not the kind of guy who likes to kind of lay down roots.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
big world, and you only get so much time here. So I thought, well, it's time to go somewhere else. Um, and I started sending out applications, and ArenaNet was the first and only place to offer to interview me and give me a job. So I took it, and I'm very happy that I did.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, another question would be, who would you say were your main like musical influences? And this could be for your compositions, but also just in general, like when you were first getting into music and wanted to play and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, they're kind of they're sort of two different things, right? Because the idea of doing the composition stuff is not something that came to me until a little later. But early on, it was really, I listened to the stuff my parents listened to, and they're of the generation that my dad always jokes around that he's like, when I was young, we didn't call it classic rock; it was just rock.
Yeah.
So I grew up, especially when I started playing guitar around 12. I grew up listening to just rock, like classic rock. Basically, my dad was like, "Oh my God, you got to check this out."
Mm-hmm.
So the Beatles were probably the biggest one as a kid. Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, all that stuff, right? And then as I got a little older and I kind of started to decide what I liked on my own, I got way, way, way into Van Halen. uh, like way into it, like taping up my guitars
Yeah.
and guitar, and I hated practicing though, and I never really liked just shredding scale. So
Mm-hmm.
I sort of stopped at a certain point with trying to emulate him, but I still every once in a while when I'm playing guitar, there's like a Van Halenism that comes out, which I make no apologies for. Uh, so yeah, and then as I got even older, I got way into like late kind of teenage years. I got super into the Beach Boys, which is not really guitar music at all,
Yeah.
but it's just beautiful music to me. Uh, and the Who, I'm still actually super into the Who. I probably get more into them as I get older. I think Pete Townsend is like, it's unfortunate. So like 5 or 6 years ago, they did the halftime show at the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
which for our international viewers is a major American sporting event. Um, and it wasn't very good.
Oh
Um,
no.
and I think they were just having an off night. But the thing is, I had actually seen them live, like this in like 2008 or 2009 maybe. So it was right around the same time. And yeah, they're old and like, it's not really the same band. It's like Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of other guys, and they're all of an amazing pedigree. But it's still not the Who,
Yeah.
like the four original guys. But they were. I remember when I saw them live, I was like, my God, these guys are. This is a better band than I'll ever be in, and it's not even the real band. you know, they were so good, and then they did the Super Bowl, and it wasn't very good. And I think that it tainted a lot of people's perception of
Yeah.
the band. It's just kind of aging sort of dinosaurs, and it really does them a disservice because they're more important than I think they get credit for. And I think a big part of that is that their records are not that great.
Right.
Compared to their live show, right?
Yeah.
Like live, they're unbelievable. And if you watch a video of them in their prime, like early 70s, late 60s, it's unreal how good they are as a band, right? And especially in this day and age of super produced tracks, right? Like so studio processed tracks.
Yeah.
The art of just four guys on stage totally gelling together and making amazing music is completely lost. And anyway, so the records, like, it's difficult to capture that, right? So some of their later records are really good, and they're good studio records, and the songwriting's good, but it's like live where they really shine.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know how I got off on this tangent, but
That's fine.
oh yeah, so I feel like, yeah, it was the Super Bowl thing that they lost a little bit of that luster for people, and it's easy to just make fun of them as being old guys on stage,
Yeah.
which I think is unfair because, with any luck, we'll all be a bunch of old guys. So it's like,
Yeah.
how can you fault them for doing what they've spent their whole life doing? So
Yeah.
anyway, those are my feelings on the Who. So those are the bands I think that really mean the most to me, outside of writing orchestral kind of score writing. When it comes to that kind of stuff, it's really, it's a mix of people, right? Like, I think most people that are under the age of, 60 or 70, their real exposure to orchestral music is through film scores.
Yeah.
And for me, just like anybody else between a very large age bracket, it kind of starts with John Williams. I just think his music is amazing, and he sets such an unreasonably high bar that no one can ever reach it. So it's like you can't even attempt to achieve that. You just have to kind of, start with the next notch down, which is very, very far down. But his music I just love. I love Star Wars. I love Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that's one that actually doesn't get a lot of airtime, but it's probably my favorite soundtrack of his. I think it's amazing. And it's the most like out there. It's the closest he got to a horror soundtrack, I think.
Yeah.
His Jaws would sort of be too, but this one is way more out there. Even Harry Potter, which is like latter day sort of John Williams, I think is a brilliant soundtrack. And I don't even like those movies, but I love the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So he's probably number one by a long shot. Number two, I don't even know if it's worth sort of making a list, but I love, Jerry Goldsmith. I love his soundtrack to the first Star Trek movie, the original Star Trek movie, which is my favorite of all of them. His soundtrack is just as good, I think, as John Williams' Star Trek soundtrack for a space movie, right? But it's so different. Like, he just took it in a totally different direction. And at that time, to stake out something creatively so unique in the shadow of this monolithic soundtrack, really impressive. James Horner, another guy that I love, who's like total virtuosic writer who unfortunately has a tendency to repeat himself a lot, but his best soundtracks are incredible. Howard Shore, another guy who, again, was able to reinvent the epic film orchestra in a way that, after decades and decades of hearing the same sort of type of big orchestral score, to come in The Lord of the Rings and do something new that created its own niche that people are like, oh, I want that sound, right? Impressive. And then also, those are all kind of relatively modern guys. There's a whole wave of people from the very early days of Hollywood and the kind of golden age that I'm just now really learning to appreciate, like Bernard Herrmann, who did all of Alfred Hitchcock's movies. Right. His stuff is just beautiful. The soundtrack to Vertigo is one of my favorites. Who else? There's a Czech composer named, I think he's Czech. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
His name is Miklos Rosa, which I'm probably butchering, but it's one of those names that has like all these crazy symbols above the letters, and I don't know how to pronounce. But he did a soundtrack to a movie called El Cid, which is one of those sort of classic 50s epic movies. Mm-hmm. And the soundtrack is just so good. It's so good. And then who else? Beyond even film score, my favorite guys are always guys that focus on melody. Mm-hmm. Even whether it's pop music or film score stuff, the stuff I respond to most is melodic. So my favorite guys are the kind of late romantic composers, which is where all film score naturally evolved from, right?
Yeah.
Because in the early days of film, the guys who were doing the music for it were just late romantic composers who were looking for a gig
Yeah.
elsewhere, and film was, a paying gig. So guys like Aaron Copland, I love Aaron Copland. The Russian, bunch of Russian composers like uh, I'm blanking, Prokofiev and gosh, who's the Nutcracker guy? Why can't I remember his name?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I know who you
No.
mean. I can't remember the name.
Anyway, he's a Russian guy. It's embarrassing. No, why can't I remember his name? It doesn't matter. The Nutcracker by somebody. uh, so yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I respond to the most.
Yeah.
If I suddenly blurt out his name later in the in this interview,
I can.
you just have to be prepared because
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. It's going to pop in my head at the last second.
Cool. And yeah, I've only got one more question, which would just be, have you got any advice for budding composers looking to get like a foot through the door into the industry and just working on things in general?
Yeah. Well, it's tough, right? Like I've said this a couple times already, but getting into the industry is not a straight line, which is like a total cliche. And it's easy to just say things like work hard and believe in it and don't give up and all that kind of stuff. And all that is true, but it's a mix of things, right? Like you have to have solid musical chops, and that doesn't mean you need to be able to write a symphony, which I can't write a symphony, or at least I don't, not yet. But you have to have a solid understanding of music, and how to use music to enhance the mood of something, right? Like how would you use it for storytelling purposes?
Yeah.
Whether it's just an acoustic guitar, or it's a full 80-piece orchestra. And that's one side, right? And that's the easy part, I think. And then the hard part is kind of meeting the right people, being in the right place at the right time. I mean, it really is about persistence, I think, more so than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And having the confidence in your own abilities and having the abilities in general to, when somebody is like, hey, I'm working on a game, do you think you could do this? You're like, yes.
Yeah.
And maybe you've never done it before, but you have some doubts, but you have to kind of communicate like, I'm capable of writing music and I'm capable of doing the technical side of it, right? So learning as much as possible about the technical side of games, which I think is actually easier now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
You don't, in the early days, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of guys needed a computer science degree. Like the guy doing sound and music for a game was just a guy with a computer science degree that also had like a side interest in music.
Yeah, yeah.
Nowadays you don't need that, but you do need to be tech savvy. You do need to have an understanding of what engines are out there and what's called middleware, which is like third-party software that bridges the gap between the content you create and the game engine itself. If you're working at a place that doesn't have like in-house kind of proprietary tools,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, you just buy a license to what's called middleware, and that is pre-made kind of software that aids you in implementing audio and music into a game engine.
Right.
The most popular ones they're called WISE, which is spelled with two W's, WWISE, and FMOD, FMOD. And both of those you can actually freely download,
Oh, really?
completely free of charge. If you want to use them for a project, you have to pay for a license. But if you just want to learn them, they're totally free. And you don't need to be a power user, but just having that level of understanding of how audio is implemented in games is a leg up, right? If you just say, I'm a great musician, or I made a cool explosion sound, like, hire me. People like that are a dime a dozen. So you have to kind of, it's more important you're able to hit the ground running and demonstrate an ability to understand the technical side of games, which is very different than any other medium, right? Like it's there's two sides of it. There's the audio side, there's the music side, and they have crossover. And women, I would imagine, they come in like maybe they have a degree in film scoring, and they have a background doing TV or movies, and they're like, oh, I'll get into games because there's money there. But it's a very different medium. And, you know, if you're some big name, then maybe it's easy to kind of steamroll your way into working on a project. But if you're not, there's no value saying like, I worked on some primetime drama and let me work on a game. You know, you might be able to fool some people, but I think it's more important to say like, I understand the creative possibilities of games, and here's something unique that I bring to the table, or here's a cool idea I have for how to do this. Not just I know how to write for an orchestra, or I did this cool soundtrack to this one thing, and hire me for your game. So there's that side of it, and then like I said, the other side is really just knowing the right people, and whether it's finding people locally, depending on where you are, right? It's really difficult depending on your geographic location. Or finding people on the internet. I mean, where people are more connected from all over the world now, more than ever, and it might mean that you have to work on a bunch of stuff for free, stuff that may never get finished, but all of that is experience, right? Maybe you learn how to make your own crappy game. Even going through that is valuable experience.
Totally.
And you know, you have to you can't immediately shoot for the stars, I don't think. I think setting your sights on immediately breaking into like the AAA space is not, it's not worth it, right? Because one, that space is shifting and contracting significantly to the point where there's only a handful of really major studios putting out really high level games, and to think that you can kind of break in at that level, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely. But the indie game space is more vibrant now than ever, right? So finding people at similar stages of their career and kind of coming up together is, I think, more realistic than saying, I'm going to aim as high as possible. And if I don't get that, then I'm not, you know, it's not worth it. So yeah, I think piecing together small projects, just finding the right people to work on, and getting yourself in a position that when a bigger opportunity arrives, you're ready to jump on it. So yeah, unfortunately, there's no secret formula,
right?
And you know, especially in audio, if you talk to anybody in audio and music, everybody's got this crazy winding path. Like with artists and with programmers, it's really easy to just go to school, learn it, and immediately have a job. You know, I'm not saying everybody does, but I would say it's much easier because those departments tend to be much larger in every company, and there's a lot of turnover. But with audio, it's very small. Like I said, not a lot of turnover. So yeah, you kind of have to be really creative in in how you attempt to get a job, and then just stick with it.
Cool. Well, thanks. That's actually all the questions I have for you today. So yeah, thank you so much for sparing some of your time to talk to me today. It was awesome.
Yeah, of course. I'm actually looking up the composer who I'm trying to think of because I'm embarrassed that I can't remember his name.
Okay.
And it's a shame that I have to do this, but that is why they invented
Google.
Google, and you know, magic boxes that we can just sort of say, magic box, tell me the answer to my question. Sorry, bear with me. Tchaikovsky. Why couldn't I remember that? Tchaikovsky. One of my favorites. Yeah, I hope he's rolling over in his grave. I was like, I love that guy. What's his name?
Cool.
Anyway.
Well, thanks again. Yeah, it's been awesome. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for listening, and it was nice talking to you.